Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom, and today we're talking about noise that is driving me up the wall.
Oh.
This happens a lot, of course, if you live in a big city like, say, Taipei, where there's lots of traffic and lots of construction noise and stuff like that. I suppose it's the same in New York or LA, places like that.
It's actually worse in New York for me.
Probably, because Manhattan is kind of crowded there. But in any case here, yes, usually people kind of get annoyed at noise.
Yes.
But there is such a condition in which the noise can actually cause you to have some really severe reactions to it, and it's actually considered a disease or a disorder, and it's referred to as misophonia. That's what we're talking about today in our unit on research.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I mean, some sounds drive me nuts, too. But there was a dog in my apartment building that was really big. I mean, it's a big dog. And the owner would go, and that dog would howl all day.
Ooh.
And finally, it wasn't just me, it was everybody else. I've noticed that I tend to say something before other people. But finally, the dog left. But that is normal. People, that's a loud sound. But this particular condition, you can't even stand people eating. You can hear them chewing, and it drives you nuts. So I would hate to have this condition. This is a tough one.
Yeah, it's something that causes you to be bothered by all sorts of noise that most of us have learned to ignore.
Yeah.
We'll have some examples of what some of those noises could be in just a couple of seconds here. But hey, let's talk about what this illness is right now. Everybody, let's read the entire contents of our lesson, and we'll be right back.
You're sitting in a cinema waiting for the movie to begin. All around you hear the familiar sounds of rustling food wrappers and people munching on popcorn and slurping soda. While these sounds are all typical of a cinema setting, they're a complete nightmare for people suffering from misophonia. Misophonia, also known as selective sound sensitivity syndrome, is a newly recognized disorder in which the sufferer develops extreme feelings of anger in response to certain noises. These trigger sounds can vary from person to person. However, repetitive and bodily sounds are among the most common irritants for sufferers of misophonia. While the everyday sounds of people chewing, breathing, smacking their lips, or clicking their pens don't agitate most people, they can evoke stress, anger, irritation, and in extreme cases, violent rage for those suffering from misophonia. Researchers are only beginning to look at the science behind misophonia. Preliminary findings suggest that the emotional control mechanism of the brain is overly active for people with this condition. When sufferers hear specific trigger sounds, their brains go into overdrive, causing them to react very strongly to the auditory stimuli. Affected individuals find the noise unbearable and feel as though they have to lash out at the source of the offending sound. Although there is no cure for misophonia, psychological interventions have helped patients acquire strategies to cope with their negative emotions. Moreover, experts seem to agree that misophonia isn't so much about the sounds themselves. For example, people with misophonia are not as bothered by these trigger sounds if they make them themselves. Therefore, mimicry is one way of dealing with this. So the next time someone glares at you for drumming your fingers, spare a thought for them. After all, this sound might not simply be a pet peeve, but a source of physiological and psychological distress.
Okay, everybody, it's time to talk about our lesson today. And the title is When Noise Drives You Up the Wall.
Yeah.
Here, to drive you up the wall just means to make you crazy, to make you really irritated.
Well, you could say when noise drives you up the wall, drives you crazy. They're both the same.
Same thing, right? Noise can drive you crazy. It can make you go out of your mind, to lose your mind, to go completely bonkers, etc.
Yeah.
Well, this is how we're going to introduce the topic for today. We're going to present...
Make the sounds?
Yeah, make the annoying sounds. Here we go.
Okay.
Clicking pens, making mouth noises, burping, stuff like that. Those are all examples of noises that maybe we think are kind of funny or something, but if you're suffering from misophonia, you might find that something really annoying and it will drive you up the wall. But also, we're going to introduce this topic by presenting a possible scenario for you. So you're sitting in a cinema, you know, a movie theater, waiting for the movie to begin, and all around you hear the familiar sounds of rustling food wrappers and people munching on popcorn and slurping soda. When you slurp, you
slurping noodles too. We slurp noodles. Not even that. How about your next door neighbor in the theater is eating pai gu fan? And you're like, what? Yeah.
Pai gu fan
that
in
happened
the movie
to me.
theater.
Yeah,
it kind of depends on what movie theater you're going to. Sometimes they don't allow you to bring in outside food.
In the States, you can't. In the U.S., you cannot.
You can't. The second-run movie theater in my neighborhood doesn't care what you bring in.
That's nice.
People might be making noise, rustling their plastic bags or something like that. So, imagine this happening to you. And while these sounds are all typical of a cinema setting, they're usual, they're normal. Most of us, don't really mind. They're a complete nightmare for people suffering from misophonia. Okay, so even though they're typical of a cinema, they're normal to the rest of us, they are a complete nightmare for people who suffer from this affliction. Now, here we've got nightmare. That can mean a bad dream, but it can also refer to something in your life that causes you a lot of trouble. Gee, that new employee at the company is a complete nightmare. We have to work overtime every night just to make up for his mistakes.
Or, ladies, have you ever been on a date and it was horrible? You could describe it as a nightmare. Oh my gosh, that date last night was a nightmare. I never thought we would be finished and I could go home. So it's tough for these folks. It's not a joke. And some of them get very, very anxious or angry even. We're going to talk about why that is. So misophonia, starting in the second paragraph, also known as selective sound sensitivity syndrome. A lot of times when we talk about these medical conditions, we call them syndromes. This is one where selective sounds, not every sound, but selective, some sounds, but not everything, really drive them crazy. They're very sensitive to it. If you have a sensitivity problem, it just means you are very aware of things that other people don't even notice, and it bothers you. You might have sensitive allergies. Maybe you're allergic to everything that other people, it doesn't bother them at all. So if you're sensitive, things are troubling or bothering you that don't bother the mass out there. The masses don't even notice.
Exactly. And again, as you said, it's selective. So maybe the sound of a symphony orchestra or the wind blowing through the trees or the sound of birds chirping won't bother them, but other things will, maybe like some of the sounds we were just making there. And if somebody is suffering from misophonia, they probably switched off the radio there pretty quickly there when we started making those noises.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's another name for the disease, selective sound sensitivity syndrome. Syndrome is sort of like a disease, like Down syndrome, for example. Some people suffer from that. This is a newly recognized disorder in which the sufferer develops extreme feelings or anger in response to certain noises. Okay, so it's a disorder, which is basically just some kind of affliction, some kind of disease, a disorder. What's the one there? Attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, hyperactivity disorder, or something like that.
PSTD, post-stress. What is that one?
Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
That's something that veterans suffer from if they've come back from a war zone or something like that. So in any case, this is a new disorder. We've got plenty of disorders in the world now, and you have feelings of anger or anxiety in response to certain noises. And these trigger sounds can vary from person to person, which means they're different with different people. We're calling these trigger sounds. Trigger is usually on a gun as a noun there. If you want to shoot the gun, you pull the trigger. Nowadays in the US, we have something that's called a trigger warning. If the professor in your college class is going to say something that might make you sad, then we need to have a trigger warning so that you can prepare yourself to plug your ears so your little eardrums don't get harmed.
We use trigger a lot in medicine, though, because something that doesn't bother somebody else will bother you. For example, if you have allergies or asthma, one of the triggers for me is humid, rainy days. That's when my asthma gets worse. So when you have some of these syndromes or disorders, you need to know what affects you and what causes some pain or discomfort to start. That's the trigger. So this can vary from person to person. Everybody is sensitive to different things, and their triggers are different too. However, repetitive and bodily sounds are among the most common things that irritate these sufferers of misophonia. So if something's repetitive, it repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. That bothers them. Also, sounds that humans make when we're eating, burping, coughing, I don't know, smacking. When you smack your lips, we talk about that. Smacking is
like that.
Yeah, but I got in trouble growing up. If I ate like that at home, my mom would say, hey, come on, we don't want to all hear you eating. You know, it had to be quiet.
Yeah, usually Americans or Westerners in general don't like to make noise when they eat.
No smacking.
No smacking
no
or
slurping.
No slurping. I understand slurping your noodles is pretty common in Japan.
It's a good thing, I think, there.
To them, yes, but I think Westerners probably are annoyed by that, whereas people in Japan think it's normal, nothing wrong with that, etc. But again, these sounds can vary from person to person, and we've talked about things that could be repetitive, over and over, and these are irritants, and you listed some examples there. Chewing, breathing, smacking their lips, or clicking our pens.
Oh, that's popular.
Yeah, that might agitate some people.
Yeah.
To agitate means to, make them feel kind of anxious.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they can also evoke stress or cause stress or pressure. It can bring about anger, I'm so mad, and irritation, which of course means you're bothered by something. And in extreme cases, violent rage for those suffering from misophonia. Rage, of course, is a state of extreme anger.
Okay. Yeah. So this is how they respond to some of these common everyday noises that we all accept, and most of us don't even hear it. Right now, guys, it's pretty much time to take a break. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher, who makes none of these annoying noises. Don't worry. And then we'll be back.
Hello everyone, my name is Tina. 在今天的文章一刚开始呢，就是一个看电影的这个背景，然后你会听到很多的声音，也就是大家咀嚼食物、喝汽水的声音。第一个空格的句子写着 While these sounds are all blank one of a cinema setting， 这些声音其实呢，在一些戏院的环境当中，你都常常会听到这样子典型的声音。我们第一题可以选择 F 选项的 typical， be typical of 就是代表是什么的典型或者是常见的意思。这些声音虽然很常见，可是对这些患有 misophonia 也就是恐音症的人来讲，可不是这么简单的事咯。接着来看到第二段的第一个句子提到 Misophonia, also known as selective sound sensitivity syndrome, is a newly blank 2 disorder. 所谓的恐音症呢，它最近呢怎么样是一个失调症状。我们在这里呢，它是一个新被承认的一个失调的症状，所以搭配文意。第二题我们可以选择 K 选项的 recognized。Be recognized 也就是被公开承认是一个新的一个病症。接着来看到第三个空格 These trigger sounds can blank 3 from person to person. 在助动词的后面要放一个原形动词，提到这些触发的声音会因人而异，所以我们可以搭配句意。第3题选择 A 选项 vary from person to person， 也就是有因人而异的意思。而第4个空格前半句提到，虽然这些声音都是平常日常所见，我们看后半句 They can blank for stress, anger, irritation， 虽然都非常的常见，但是他们却可以怎么样？压力、怒气或者是一些气恼的症状。一样，在助动词后面放一个原形动词，我们可以搭配文意的是 B 选项 evoke， 也就有引起、唤起。而这些恐音症的人，正是因为听到这些声音，就会唤起后面不悦的情绪感觉。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, everybody, we shall try to continue with our article, and I'm going to control myself because it seems that this article is giving me an excuse to make all sorts of obnoxious noises, which boys like to do, of
Tom
course.
Tom loves it. Yes.
I love it, but you know, you never know. There might be somebody suffering from misophonia out there, so I will keep my behavior in check here.
Okay,
but
good.
Again, researchers here in the third paragraph, researchers are only beginning to look at the science behind misophonia. So, yes, oftentimes we observe a disease, but we don't really know what's causing it, and we need doctors and scientists and stuff to look into this for us. And preliminary findings suggest that the emotional control mechanism of the brain is overly active for people with this condition. So, this is preliminary findings. Preliminary means the first things that are coming out, and they come before the other things. Preliminary, something, again, that comes out first.
Yeah, it might be a preliminary report. When they're finally all finished with it, it'll be the final version or the final report. Preliminary means they've just started researching. They're not done, but this is what they're finding so far. And these findings, what they've discovered, their research suggests, see, findings is plural, so we would say findings suggest, but research suggests, with an S, that the emotional control mechanism of the brain is overly active. So that would be tough. It's not something they can control. It's part of their brain that's just a little bit too active. It's overly active when people have this condition. There are lots of similar, I think there's a similar condition where people just they don't have a lot of patience in their nerves. It's very easy to annoy them or to upset them. And maybe that's the same thing. They've just got this overly active emotional control mechanism in their brain. Emotional just relates to your feelings, right? And how you respond. You notice that these people who have misophonia, they don't react with laughter. They react with anger. And there's the peace that most of us feel is gone. So it's something that you definitely want to help these people avoid. And even though there's no cure, we're going to find out there is something they can do to help them. Now, these findings took place after all of this research. Now, one of the things they learned is that when sufferers, those are people that have this disorder or disease, when they hear specific trigger sounds to them that activate that overly active emotional brain, when they hear those trigger sounds, that's when their brains go into overdrive. Hey, Tom, talk about overdrive. I know we use it in Star Trek movies. They go into overdrive, don't they? When the Starship Enterprise can go faster, doesn't it go into overdrive? Do cars go into overdrive?
Yeah, there's a kind of gear in cars that give you a gear ratio that's higher than some of the other gears, so you can actually go faster and maybe in a way save fuel, or you can actually travel faster, etc., etc. So it's like kind of a high gear, basically. So yes, their brains go into overdrive, their brains get really active, and that causes these people to react very strongly to that auditory stimuli. Auditory means having to do with sound or the sense of hearing, like your auditory nerves in your brain, for example. And stimuli here, that refers to things that trigger you. And this this particular case, stimuli is the plural of the singular form stimulus, which again causes some kind of reaction.
For example, for those of you who cook, you know that when you cut onions, a lot of times your eyes will tear up and you'll cry. That's a stimulus that your eyes don't appreciate. They don't like it. So affected individuals find the noises, these trigger sounds, unbearable. If you can't bear something, you say it's unbearable. To bear something means you can tolerate it, you can handle it, you can endure it. But if it's unbearable, you can't. You can't endure it, you can't tolerate it. It's awful.
Yeah, the pain is unbearable.
Yeah.
Doc, give me a painkiller, please. I can't stand it.
Yeah, and they feel as though, like this, they feel like, or as though, you can use like there too, they feel like they have to lash out. When you lash out, it means you're reacting in a very angry way to lash out. You don't necessarily hit someone, but you are reacting very angrily to this. So they lash out at the source of the offending sound. So if you're making the sound, watch out. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you're sitting in a coffee shop and somebody at the next table just starts clicking their pen like this.
Or the library's worse.
And they just don't stop, and you go, why don't you stop doing that? It's so annoying. So that's lashing out at the source of that offending sound. Stop it, or I'm going to dump that hot cup of coffee over your head.
Well, usually no one says anything. They just give you the look. If someone gives you the look, then stop. Yeah. But some people don't stop just because they're like, oh, I'm not going to do what you tell me.
Yeah,
to.
that woman in the buffet kept watching her movie or whatever on her pad computer. When the TV was on, we couldn't hear it.
Oh.
She just wouldn't turn it off. We had to actually go over there and tell her to. But that's another story. But let's move on now to the next paragraph. It says, although there is no cure for misophonia, psychological interventions have helped patients acquire strategies to cope with their negative emotions. So there's no cure, there's no medicine you can really take for this, but we've got what are called psychological interventions. Psychological means having to do with your brain and how we think and stuff like that. Things that have to do with the mind. And an intervention is when somebody kind of comes in and helps out, an outsider, for example. So maybe to me, this just sounds like you try to distract yourself from the sound. You just try to think of something else or listen to a different sound.
I think they're trying to just guide the thoughts that's happening in their brain. They're guiding them to other thoughts so that they're not reacting as strongly. So they help these patients acquire strategies. And everybody's an individual, so all of these strategies are probably a little different for the patients, but it helps them to cope with those negative emotions. Because when you react angrily, you can get yourself into some trouble. You know what happens if you get angry at work, if you yell at your boss, hey, you could get fired. So you have to be able to control those emotions. And I'm glad they have some psychological interventions that can help. We use that word intervention sometimes to talk about family and friends who get involved with a person who's drinking too much and they can't get through to them that they need to, get some help. They have an intervention where they all come together and they force this person to go to rehab. That's also where you'll see this word intervention.
And the verb for that, of course, is to intervene, to kind of come in and help things out because people can't do it themselves. So, yes, we've got these psychological interventions. They have helped patients acquire strategies or plans or methods or ways to cope or deal with their negative emotions. So, yes, they've got these strategies. If they do hear someone clicking their pen or smacking their lips or munching on popcorn or tapping their feet, they can use some kinds of strategies themselves to make them forget about that. Let me think about something else. Let me make my own sounds or something like that, and it won't bother me so much.
So, that's the example there. We've got this word, therefore mimicry is one way of dealing with this. It's not a word you see very often, I have to say. I've seen it. I've never said it out loud myself. It's not a word I use, but it's the action or art of imitating someone. It just means you're imitating someone. Typically, you do it when you're trying to make fun of someone or laugh at someone or maybe even ridicule someone, which is not nice. This happens a lot when you're in elementary school, junior high, even high school. It's it's still happening.
Yeah, some birds are masters of mimicry, like the mockingbird or parrots or the lyrebird in Australia. They can copy all sorts of sounds. So this might be one way of coping or dealing with this problem. So the next time someone glares at you for drumming your fingers...Start
drumming your fingers.
Drumming your fingers like that. Spare a thought for them. Okay, please take that into consideration. Maybe that's what they're doing. They're trying to block out an annoying sound or something like that.
If you glare at someone, it's a very strong gaze. You're not just looking at them kindly. You're looking at them with some anger or some frustration. Don't glare at me.
To give someone a dirty look.
Yeah.
Well, after all, this sound might not simply be a pet peeve, but a source of physiological and psychological distress. A pet peeve, of course, is something that bothers you. One of my pet peeves is being ignored in a conversation while people are playing on their smartphones.
Oh, Tom hates that.
I especially hate that, yes.
I know.
But also we've got the word physiological here, which has to do with your body, which is opposed to psychological, which is your mind.
It's your mind, that's right. So we hope that if we have any listeners out there who are suffering with misophonia, there's help. Go get some help because this can be really frustrating for a lot of folks. Right now, guys, we're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher.
接着来看到第5个空格写着 Preliminary findings suggest that the emotional control mechanism of the brain is overly blank 5 for people with this condition. 原来啊，初步的研究发现呢，这些病症的患者，他的大脑情感控制的机制过于怎么样？搭配文意，它容易引起一些比较负面的情绪，可见大脑对于这样的状况是比较活跃的。所以呢，第5题我们可以选择 I 选项 active， 过度的活跃而引起这些不快的情绪感觉。第6个空格在后面的半句提到 Their brains go into overdrive, causing them to blank 6 very strongly to the auditory stimuli. 那么正是因为呢，大脑呢过度的反应而受到影响的人觉得难以忍受，所以大脑似乎呢对于听觉的刺激会怎么样很强烈。对于这样子的听觉刺激反应特别的强烈，一样在 to 后面搭配原形动词，我们可以选择一选项的 react 搭配后面的 to 介系词，就是有对什么反应的意思。而第7个空格我们从 as though 开始看，这些受不了的人就会感觉 as though they have to blank 7 the source of the offending sound。还记得吗？这些声音会触发他们不愉悦的感觉。为什么会这样呢？因为仿佛他们必须对这个令人讨厌的声音来源做出怎么样的举动，才会有不悦的情感呢？搭配文意，第7题我们可以选择 C 选项 lash out at something， 也就是有猛击或强烈攻击。他们觉得必须强烈的攻击那个恼人声音的来源才是正确的，这是他们大脑的反应。接着第8个空格我们一样从逗号后面开始看 Psychological interventions have helped patients acquire strategies to blank aid their negative emotions。其实呢，在心理的介入的处置方式呢，可以帮助病患来学习一些对策，来怎么样他们负面的情绪呢？当然这些负面的情绪是必要被处理跟应付的，所以第8题搭配文意就可以选择 G 选项 cope with， 就有处理应付的意思。第9个空格 For example, people with misophonia are not as blank 9 by these trigger sounds if they make them themselves。很特别的是，这些恐音症的人如果自己发出这些噪音的话，其实他们就不会像其他人在做的时候如此的被怎么样。第9题我们可以选择 H 选项的 bothered 在这里被动是敢解释成为受到打扰跟被烦恼的意思，自己发出声音倒是不会有这些被烦扰的困境。 第10个空格 After all, this sound might not simply be a pet peeve, but a source of physiological and psychological blank 10. 其实这些声音啊，也许可能是人家生理跟心理上的一个什么来源呢？我们都知道它会引发负面的情绪，在这里搭配名词，可以选择 L 选项的 distress， 则是有苦恼、忧伤的意思。OK， 以上就是今天的课文讲解，谢谢收听。
That's all for today, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie. See
Bye.
ya.